Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. Let's talk about the narcissism tax. You're like, what? Yeah, no, folks who are toxic will not have to pay more in taxes. In fact, I would venture to guess that they probably spend less on their taxes. No, but I got to tell you, the rest of us are paying a narcissism tax because these relationships are actually really costly for us. So let's talk about that. If you are going to have to stay in a narcissistic relationship, you already know this. These relationships require lots of workarounds, right? Or it will be the constant revolving door of confusing and the same arguments again and again, the gaslighting, all the rest of it. You know all of that, right? If you are going to keep any semblance of normal life for yourself while trying to keep a narcissistic person or people in check, it's going to cost you. So let's break down a few scenarios to make this clear, shall we? Okay, so let's start with this one. You are in a relationship with a narcissistic person. Neither of you maybe need to use a car that much, right? Get by with one. But they have their car and they care more about their car than they care about you. It's just a car, but that's how they feel about it. You are so exhausted from last minute arguments about needing the car or them saying they'll give it to you, but then not, or sometimes having to turn to taxis or Ubers at the last minute that you end up having to purchase a car you really don't need. Another example, you are in a narcissistic relationship and you can't count on your narcissistic partner to get the children ready for school on the few days that you may need to go to work a little bit earlier than usual for a meeting, or on days that you may get stuck at work later, even though the narcissistic partner could absolutely be able to help you out with those kids at those times. And so you have to pay to keep a babysitter on call to step in to rescue you because you can't count on the other parent. Here's another one. Your toxic boss is deeply manipulative and is constantly shifting around expectations and schedules. You've been planning on going on a few trips to see old friends this summer, but you end up having to pay extra to purchase refundable and changeable tickets because you have no idea if you will be able to get out on the trip when you had planned on it. And in the past, you've missed trips entirely because they change things around. Here's another one. You give your narcissistic adult child money just as a loan. You assumed it was a loan. You assumed wrong. Another one would be that your highly controlling narcissistic sibling and narcissistic family will all be attending a family event that you are helping to organize. Then your sibling, your sister's drama about what her kids eat and her snobbery about the kind of food you serve and the decorations and the venue and the arguments it creates for you are exhausting. So you spend several hundred more dollars in additional food just to keep the peace and suit her fussy little palate. And another one. Your narcissistic friend drops her child off for a couple of hours as you had agreed upon, but then she calls later in an entitled manner and says, you got to keep my kid for a few more hours. And your life is much easier because you don't have kids. So just do this for me. Now, the problem was you had already made an arrangement to do something else. You can't just leave the child alone. Your friend won't come back soon enough. So you end up having to cancel and reschedule an appointment at the last minute. You end up having to pay a cancellation fee as a result. Okay. All of those things are examples of how these relationships are expensive. And while I am obviously a big believer in therapy, therapy ain't free. In fact, it's quite expensive. And Lord knows I can vouch for that. The many years of therapy I myself have been in, largely been focused on managing the narcissistic abuse that's happened in my life. It hasn't been cheap. So many cases of narcissistic abuse do require a person to be in therapy to cope, to support other mental health issues, to get support, and it isn't free. And add in there the other physical health issues you're likely to be facing as a result of the chronic stress of a narcissistic relationship. Yep, more medical bills, more money. Narcissistic relationships are characterized by a lack of support, and that can impede people being able to advance in their own careers, right? If you're always doing these workarounds. So if you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, and obviously you're not going to be working together as a team to support each other, you may find yourself, for example, having to leave paid work to manage the burdens of household and career, or not being able to advance in your career because you're wasting so much damn time forever trying to manage the fallout of the relationship, either with your partner or even with your family of origin, or always coming up with these workarounds. It may not be money directly coming out of your pocket, but in this case, that narcissism tax may be that you lose out on future salary you'd make if you could have advanced in your career. Narcissistic relationships can mean unfinished projects, big promises of things that they're going to do that they make, and then they aren't realized, all future faking, right? And then you need to pay someone to clean up their messes. Needing to pay for help for small things that in theory could be done quite easily, but that you may not be able to do, or that your schedule won't allow, right? And the narcissistic person in your life who is fully capable or has the time won't do it. Again, more money out. And of course, the ultimate narcissism tax may be seen in how much more expensive these divorces are. If someone had handed you an estimate of how much this divorce mess was going to cost you before you signed the marriage license, my guess is that you might have said, I might need a minute before I sign this. Give yourself a cooling off period before you signed off on that, right? To be in a narcissistic relationship and stay in it means that you constantly need to devise a plan A, B, C, and D. And to have so many contingency and backup plans can get expensive. Many times people who are in narcissistic relationships, that I'm talking about the non-narcissistic person in the relationship, say, well, why should I come up with a backup plan? That's my spouse, that's my boss, that's my colleague. They need to do their part. Okay, wait for them to do their part. Keep waiting. Then at clutch time, I can guarantee you, they're often not going to do their part. And you are left holding the bag and scrambling, which can feel even worse or be even more expensive, just like everything at the last minute is. And especially if it's a high stakes situation. For example, your children are sitting in front of the school, not picked up, or you have to designate someone to pick you up from a surgery because the hospital or the surgery center isn't going to let you go home in an Uber, right? Are you really willing to roll the dice on an error when it involves your kids not getting picked up, or perhaps missing your best friend's wedding because you didn't purchase a more flexible ticket that was also more expensive? And at that point, the narcissistic person is not going to magically sweep in and fix it. And then what that means is you are left in an absolute and regrettable mess. Some folks in narcissistic relationships, especially people who still remain very trauma bonded, continually maintain the fantasy that this time the narcissist is going to get it right. That damned hope, right? It never works. But then the narcissist doesn't come through, and it turns into a battle and so much disappointment. You don't have the bandwidth for these chronic battles. And I promise you, it will go nowhere. If you do end up having to communicate with a narcissist, you're going to need workarounds, and those workarounds aren't free. The narcissism tax. And obviously, one of your greatest taxes is being paid in time. Simply put, because of all these contingency plans, these relationships involve lots of wasted times. Making plans B, C, D, all of that takes time. Thinking through every contingency takes time. Calling 3, 4, 5 people to be your backup takes time. Ruminating about what can and likely will go wrong takes time. Cleaning up the messes when they don't show up or do their share or leave a job half finished takes time. You can't have that time back, and there are much better uses of that time. Personally, when I stop to think about how much time and frankly money I have wasted in trying to get things done in narcissistic relationships, I shudder, because it likely equals a few years of life I can't have back and a hell of a lot of money. Staying in a narcissistic relationship is a treacherous balance of appeasing and enabling and survival. You have to get through your days. That's it. You have to get through your days. Manage your priorities, including your work, caregiving, and every so often yourself. And you have to get to the radical acceptance that you probably will not be able to rely on them. Even if it's the narcissist kids, the narcissist business, their family, their house, they ain't going to come through. That sometimes figuring it out yourself is better than the fight. To give up on the trauma-bonded hope that this time they will get it right, they won't. And that means you taking care of issues yourself. It really is a tax on anyone who's in a narcissistic relationship, because the significant narcissistic person in their lives, a family member, a partner, or a friend, probably will not help out in a pinch. And that means you're going to have to pay more often for things that normal people don't regularly have to pay for, or accounting for mishaps that normally people don't have to. And all of this adds up. Listen, it's one thing if you're super wealthy and you can just snap your fingers and get your messes cleaned up because the money doesn't matter to you. I got to tell you, the odds are those finger snappers are probably the narcissists, right? But for us normal folks, the extra several hundred here, sometimes even thousands there, it all adds up. And on top of that, we don't have the social support and moral support that is, in fact, priceless. So, and the time part, that's the even more precious currency, because there's no way really to buy that back, right? So not only are narcissistic relationships taxing your mental health, they're also taxing your wallet, like literally a tax. I'd be curious to hear from all of you. Have any of you feel like you've had to pay a narcissistic tax in your relationships? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what other people's experience has been. But I'm telling you, not only does it suck to be in these relationships, it's really expensive. Thanks again.